Let's talk about the epic story of Lynyrd Skynyrd. This is a band that didn't just define a genre, they lived one of the most extreme, dramatic lives in all of rock and roll. It's an incredible tale of triumph, unspeakable tragedy, and a legacy that, honestly, is still being debated to this very day.
So picture this. It's October 1977. The band is at the absolute peak of their powers. They've just dropped a killer new record, Street Survivors, and it's flying off the shelves. They were, without a doubt, on top of the world.
And then, just 3 days later, it was over. Just like that. The entire story came to a sudden, violent, and tragic end. The brightest flame in Southern rock was snuffed out in an instant, and it changed music history forever. You know what, there's this quote from the lead singer Ronnie Van Zant. He said it about their incredible new guitarist Steve Gaines. He thought Gaines was so good, he literally said the rest of the band would one day be in his shadow. After what happened next, those words became just chillingly, tragically ironic.
All right, so to really get this story, we've got to go back. Let's start at the very beginning and trace how this scrappy group of kids from Jacksonville, Florida, went from jamming in a carport to becoming the undisputed kings of Southern rock.
The band's origins are about as random as it gets. It all kicked off in the summer of '64 when Ronnie Van Zant fouled off a baseball and hit the drummer Bob Burns in the head. But instead of a fight, they decided to start a band. They went through a bunch of names, My Backyard, The Noble Five, The 1%, before finally, in 1969, landing on the one that would make them famous.
And that iconic name? Well, it came from a place of pure, uncut teenage rebellion. It was a joke, a jab at their high school gym teacher, a guy named Lynyrd Skynyrd, who was constantly on their case about the school's strict no long hair policy. So, of course, they decided to immortalize him forever.
But look, it wasn't just the name or the attitude that made them famous. Their sound, it was something else entirely. It was truly revolutionary. So what was the secret sauce? Well, it all came down to a powerful, unique musical formation that totally changed the game.
They basically pioneered this concept they called the triple guitar attack. You gotta understand, this was not just three guys noodling around and improvising. No way. The Skynyrd approach was almost like a military operation. It was disciplined, meticulously arranged like a rock and roll orchestra, creating this massive wall of sound that was still incredibly precise.
And in this guitar army, every soldier had a very specific role. You had Gary Rossington, who was the bluesy soul of the band, with that incredible, emotional slide guitar. Then there was Alan Collins, the high-energy shredder, just pure firepower. And rounding it out was Ed King, who brought this clean, sharp precision. The guy even used seashells as picks just to get the perfect attack. And that sound is what launched them into the stratosphere. In 1974, their album Second Helping gave us Sweet Home Alabama. And while yeah, it became this massive Southern anthem, it was also way more complicated than that. It was a direct response to songs by Neil Young that criticized the South. The lyrics even take a shot at the segregationist governor George Wallace, which shows you their perspective was a lot more nuanced than people gave them credit for. So the band is on top of the world. Street Survivors is a smash hit. It really feels like nothing can stop them. But their incredible rise came to a sudden, violent, and permanent end on October 20th, 1977. The official NTSB investigation revealed what was just a heartbreaking, perfect storm of failures. The main cause? The plane simply ran out of fuel. That was made worse by a bad right engine that was guzzling gas way too fast. But at the end of the day, it came down to catastrophic pilot error. The crew never checked the fuel tanks by hand, and they failed to turn towards the nearest airport when they still had a chance. And here's the detail that just sends a shiver down your spine. Earlier that same year, another huge rock band, Aerosmith, had actually looked at leasing that exact same plane for their tour. Their own flight crew took one look and rejected it, saying that neither the plane nor its pilots were safe enough to fly. The human cost was just immense. 6 people were killed. Among them, lead singer Ronnie Van Zant, the brilliant new guitarist Steve Gaines, and his sister, backing vocalist Cassie Gaines. 20 others somehow survived, but many with just horrific, life-changing injuries. So after a disaster like that, what do you do? Where do you go from there? Well, in the aftermath, the story of Lynyrd Skynyrd became one of grief, for sure, but also of legal battles and this incredibly difficult question of how, or even if, a band can go on after its heart has been ripped out. Immediately following the crash, the survivors were completely shattered, and they did what you'd expect.
They disbanded. They supposedly took a blood oath that the band died on that plane with their friends, and they swore they would never, ever perform as Lynyrd Skynyrd again. And for 10 years, they kept that promise.
But in 1987, they put together a tribute tour, and it was a massive success. So successful, in fact, that it sparked the idea of a real reunion. Well, that led to a pretty intense legal battle with the widows of Van Zandt and Gaines. It all ended with this really complex legal document in 1988 called a consent order. It laid out these strict rules, like the lineup rule, which said you had to have a certain number of original guys on stage, and the approval rule, which gave the estates control over how the band's story was told. So, the band was back, but it was a completely different entity now. Its identity would forever be shaped by loss, by lawsuits, and just by the unstoppable passage of time.
And over the next 3 decades, time just kept marching on. The remaining original members began to pass away, one by one. Bassist Leon Wilkeson in 2001, keyboardist Billy Powell in 2009, and this all culminated in March of 2023 with the death of the very last founding member, guitarist Gary Rossington.
But, and this is so important to the story, before he died, Rossington made his final wish absolutely clear. He wanted the music to live on. He personally gave his blessing for the band to keep going, even mentoring the new guys who would carry the torch. He wanted to make sure the songs would survive, even with all the original players gone.
And of course, you really can't talk about Skynyrd's legacy without getting into some of the controversy, particularly their use of the Confederate flag. Back in the 70s, they saw it as a symbol of Southern pride, of being rebels, but by 2012, their perspective had shifted. Gary Rossington said they'd stop using it, admitting it had been kidnapped by hate groups. Now, after some fans got upset, they kind of walked that back a bit, saying for them it was about heritage, not hate.
Which really brings us to the central question at the heart of the Lynyrd Skynyrd story today. When all the original creators are gone, what does a band's legacy even mean anymore? Is it a living tribute to what they built? Is it a commercial brand? Or is it something else entirely? The music for sure plays on, but the answer to that question, well, that's for each new generation of fans to decide for themselves.